My guest today is Sam Cooper, investigative journalist and publisher of The Bureau. We discuss the foreign interests sowing discord amongst the American public in response to the recent presidential election, the U.S. congressional report on China's involvement in the fentanyl epidemic, and the contrast in the American and Canadian view of foreign political interference. Sam and I open a can of worms in discussing the distribution of propaganda and real misinformation within the Western populace, and gaze into a rabbit hole that appears to have no bottom. Stay tuned. Sam Cooper, hot off the press. How you doing, my brother?
I'm back and in a comfortable environment rather than the National Press Gallery where I was.
Yeah, so for all of our listeners and viewers, Sam graced the press gallery with his beautiful hairdo, the swoop that he had going on at a recent press conference discussing, of all things, foreign interference. And it looks like this conversation is heating up here in Canada. And I was very, very happy to see everybody that was on the panel there. And it seems like Kevin Vuong, who's an MP here in Canada, is he current or former, Sam?
He's current. He's an independent MP who was the Liberal Party candidate by the Prime Minister. And we talked about that, but I'm sure we'll get into that.
Deliberaled. We'll just use that as a new term. He was deliberaled. He headed up this press conference, and you guys just basically spent an hour or half an hour laying out, I mean, what you and I have been talking about for months. And he seems to have a fire lit inside of him, having been specifically targeted with false accusations and other things. And so, yeah, it was amazing to watch. And you guys covered a lot of what we're talking about. And so I do got to preface our conversation today. For all of our listeners and viewers, Sam and I are recording this a week before the presidential election in the United States. You were watching this a week after. So as of this moment, while you're watching this, I am positive that there are recounts going on in a number of different states, either Democrats or Republicans contesting the results, all sorts of legalese being thrown around.
Fires in the street, probably protests. And
right
now you'll see that, I really am Nostradamus because...
So let's start by that, because you literally just published a story about... I'll let you talk about it. Talk about this story that you just published.
It was an important story, and this is in line with, I know a lot of times we debate of whether the national security community is good or bad or has a dog in the fight, but I think they've done something very good by declassifying their intelligence reports ahead of the election, saying essentially China, Russia, and Iran will be invested in sowing chaos, in undermining the results. So it doesn't matter if you're MAGA or if you're Kamala. I mean, the real narrative here is that China, Russia, and Iran, they don't care always who wins. They want America to lose. And so they everything from the assassinations which have been attempted, which no one is saying are connected to Iran, but what is being said was that Iran does want to, or perhaps even has tried and been disrupted to assassinate former President Trump. There have been obvious disinformation attacks on Kamala Harris on the other side. And the real, the punch of this report is that the American intelligence community believes that these three nations especially will go as far as funding and fomenting violent protests on American soil in the post-election period, because they believe it's an opportunity to destabilize their number one enemy. And, it gets a lot more specific in terms of which state might favor, which side, this way or that. But again, without getting into the weeds too much, they want to see people harmed in the United States, and they want the election results and democracy to be in doubt.
So if you're currently holding a Molotov cocktail listening to this podcast, there's a good chance you're doing it on behalf of a foreign adversary, right?
Yeah, even if you believe you're exercising your rights as an American, you have to start to realize that there are people that foresee themselves in kinetic warfare with us, and they're looking for useful idiots, they're looking for useful idiot groups, they're placing, agent provocateurs would be the fancy word, within these groups, they're funding these groups. So yeah, exercise your rights, but understand there's a responsibility to protect, your great nation with your actions, and do exercise your rights responsibly.
And this is where it gets confusing, because we do know that in previous circumstances, January 6th, for example, that there were agent provocateurs placed within these groups who are agents of American intelligence. And so, amongst these protest groups, not only do we have provocateurs working on behalf of American intelligence, we have provocateurs working on behalf of foreign intelligence. And that's where this gets really confusing. And, I wrote a piece um, uh, earlier this week, or a couple weeks ago now, when people are watching this, called A Mostly Peaceful Revolution, where I kind of break down how the proliferation of cultural Marxism in the West led us to where we are now. But what I'm unclear on is where this is exactly coming from. And as I trace it myself, it looks to me like it like most of it's coming from what people refer to as the American deep state, or the military industrial complex, or whatever, to kind of sow discord amongst the population and create a widening gap between groups. Now, how much of this is actually homegrown? How much of it is foreign? How much of this is coming from China? How much is coming from Russia? How much is coming from Iran? Like, do we have any idea how much of what we're seeing happening around us is a domestic psyop, is foreign interference? Like that's the chaos we find ourselves in. So do you have any insight on that? I mean, what are your thoughts?
I know that you and I tend to come down on a slightly different side of the fence on this one. I'm a little bit more trusting of American institutions, but I have no doubt that you know, this is my honest opinion, whether it's the CIA, DEA, FBI, they of course will plant agents within criminal networks,
Mhm.
meaning to counteract them. Ultimately, sometimes they're going to choose favorites. So there, that this can mean that I believe that on foreign soil, certainly the CIA is not adverse to getting close to drug traffickers, using even terrorists, terror financiers as sources, right? And at the end of the day, they optimistically they'll roll up those networks, but we know it gets messy, so that I'm very excited about saying that no one has anywhere near the deep connection between the Chinese Communist Party and international organized crime, which cannot be separated. It's essentially one and the same, as the U.S. government or certain portions of Congress now say. That's another story we can get into that I just published. But to your point, look, I mean, my own view is that I do believe in America, China, Iran, Russia are. There's no question that they will not be. They would like to see certain political leaders die. China will be much more careful about its way of operating. Iran will be most aggressive. Russia is up there, and as we've said, China with its fentanyl in a sophisticated way is sowing the most damage by far. But to your point, where do American law enforcement and intelligence agencies fit in there? Do they tend to pick their favorites within some U.S. politicians? Yeah, I'm sure it happens. But like I say, I got to have uh, considering the fact that I may have to move to the United States someday to continue my work, I've always been a huge fan and friend, brother of the United States, and so I've got to be a little bit optimistic on this one.
Well, it's man, I was thinking about you because I was watching that press conference yesterday, and it is clear amongst the four panelists, so there was yourself, Kevin Vuong. I'm blanking on the other two gentlemen's names, but one was a former CSIS agent. That's Canadian
Michel
until.
Michel Junot-Katsia, a former, anti-PRC desk chief who also worked on Russia, and Charles Burton, a internationally respected sinologist and former Canadian diplomat. And yeah, we all have the view, or at least myself and the two intelligence and sort of government aligned, that Canada is in danger of state capture. That is, the CCP's penetration is so deep, so unacknowledged by Canada's government to date, that one gets the feeling that one, being a critic of the CCP, could be operating on hostile soil on one's own in one's own homeland. I think a lot of people that I know that are deeply knowledgeable about this start to have those fears, and it's hard to convince to get it through to people listening of how serious it is. But I think that was, everyone on that panel has the view of how serious this is.
Well, what really stood out to me is how every person on the panel pointed at you as the expert, right? We have a former intelligence agent, another former diplomat, pointing to Sam Cooper saying, look, listen to Sam. Like what Sam is reporting is like top notch, top tier, right? And the thing that frustrates me as your friend is knowing that you are under threat and that your government has done absolutely nothing to protect you. In fact, in some ways, it would seem that they may be facilitating the people who would want to harm you. And that is, honestly, dude, like, just speaking off the cuff here, like, you're doing the best work of any investigative journalist in Canada, and I would argue in the world. You're so important to the greater conversation. And your government should be doing everything that they can to try to protect you, even if it implicates them, right? But I have seen definitely not liberal, but no conservative, no member of the NDP, nobody step forward and say, look, Sam Cooper's work is important and we need to follow these threads. And we have a conservative leader here in Canada by the name of Pierre Poilievre, and it looks very much like he's poised to become the next Prime Minister of Canada. Now, Pierre Poilievre is refusing. That's the story is kind of making its rounds again in legacy media, but he's refusing security clearance that would allow him to see the names of the people who are suspected to be colluding with China. Now, in your view, why is he refusing that clearance? Why doesn't he want to see those names?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always honest when I don't fully understand something. So I do think that there is the possibility, and I've heard it from people that I respect in security, that he could be strategically shielding himself from knowledge that, as I've told you a number of times very clearly, and as I mentioned to the National Press Gallery, the Conservative Party has vulnerabilities.
Mm-hmm.
Its own leadership race was interfered with by a network I traced to Vancouver, which evidently is influential within the British Columbia NDP party, and demonstrating that the United Front does not follow Canadian political boundaries. My information was also seeking to have a leader in the Conservative Party. And just to unpack my statement yesterday, because we have the chance here, I could chronologically follow, how Aaron O'Toole effectively was taken down as a leader of the Conservative Party, how Kenny Chiu was defeated very clearly by Ministry of State Security Operations, and then how these networks of journalists or community leaders, United Front actors I'm talking about in Vancouver, who had targeted my reporting in 2020, then evidently reach out to a Conservative Party leader hopeful and counsel them, you should learn from the lesson of Kenny Chiu and another conservative losing in Richmond, British Columbia. And remember, this happens months after Aaron O'Toole takes the fall for his party. And there's a wing within his party that very clearly is a united front group saying that the Conservatives lost because of their hawkish stance. So, as they say, my weave is getting a little bit wide here, but the remarks are that the United Front does not respect any political boundary, and this is what I of Canadians, and so Pierre Poilievre would learn concerning details, and yet, on the other hand, for the vast majority of Canadian media and even experts that I respect, to say that they know why he's refusing this knowledge. I don't know for sure, because there could be the argument that his hands would be tied in a way that makes it easier for Justin Trudeau to hold power. So when I don't know, exactly what the truth of the matter is, I'm going to say that, it's a confusing situation.
It is confusing. And what's confusing to me is, if he is who he says he is, then why wouldn't he want to know and expel those people from his party? I
Yeah.
think that would be a huge statement. Look, there are a lot of people in our country, just like in the United States, that are sitting in the middle right now and haven't decided on who they're going to vote for next year. A lot of Americans who, well, last week were on the fence all the way up until the last minute, right? We're in this place where most people are in the middle now. Most of us have left whatever political parties we identified with in the past because we realize that they're all weasels to some extent or another. So for Pierre Poilievre, I think it would be advantageous for him to read those names and to expel those people from his party. I mean, it would send a huge signal to everybody in our country who's sitting on the fence that he means business.
To your argument, I mean, I'm starting to warm up to that. Not that I wasn't before. I know what I would do if I was in that position.
Yeah.
But he's made very successfully the argument that when he takes power, he won't be beholden to this or that lobby group, whether you be, the big business lobby group, etc. He's going to be there for the discontented populace. That's his argument. So if you're his political strategist and you say, Pierre, it's time to just, cut this one off in the bud, even if you have to take down your friend or political advisor, even if India might have been friendlier to you and China friendlier to other people, you're going to have to come clean at some time. So there is that argument. Yeah.
Well, I think the frustration with a lot of people, and this includes myself, is that these people are playing politics, right? And there's a reason why Donald Trump is so successful, and he has been so successful, is because he doesn't play the political game. He breaks all the rules. He says the things you shouldn't say. He never, for people who watched his interview with Joe Rogan, I mean, he danced around. He never answered any of his questions directly, right? But he's just a guy. He's a guy, he's a billionaire, he's a guy who knows how to assemble winning teams, right? And whether you love him or hate him, he's not part of the machine. And that's, I think, what drives people toward him. And Pierre Poilievre has an opportunity to posture in that same way, even though he's a career politician. He's never had any other job. But he has the opportunity to break away from that. And the thing about what endears people to Poilievre is cell phone footage of him standing on the side of a highway talking to protesters and saying that Trudeau is full of shit and just talking to them like a normal person. And this is the part that frustrates me about our country, is why don't these people understand this? Why don't they understand the magic behind Donald Trump? Because whenever Pierre Poilievre is just a normal guy, not doing the political games, not doing the slogans and the overly produced campaign videos where he's like walking through Parliament, giving people high fives, handing out McDonald's, like, you know what I mean? Like, whenever he's just himself, he endears himself to people because people like who he is as a person. And the truth is, Justin Trudeau, no matter how hard he tries, never comes off as a real person, because in a lot of ways he isn't. He's not the average person. He's a trust fund kid from a family that is very much an elite member of Canadian society. And I'm just extremely frustrated because I feel like we are going to get more of the same.
If I'm standing back in it as an analyst, like I wouldn't describe myself as supporting, either of the policies of Polyev or Trump. But what I do recognize is what you're tapping into. I think you're speaking to a belief and a frustration that goes across politics now, across ages, and that is people have, over the past, let's say 10, 15 years in North America, there's just been a whole mask off moment on politics where uh, people that wouldn't classify themselves necessarily as partisan, or they might have before, there's just this deep set kind of feeling sinking in that the system isn't working for me, and it probably never was. But for some reason, an economic good life or a belief in the goodness of democracy is just chasing away from us faster than ever before, especially with young generations, I think. And we
Mm-hmm.
see that in what I know about Trump's movement or Polyev. It's like rewriting political rules that younger generations are starting to jump on that bandwagon, whereas in the past they would almost always sort of lean a lot to the left.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, and that's where conservatives have capitalized, right? It's kind of weird. It's like we're in this like weird mirror universe where suddenly the right is the side of the punk rockers and the anti-authoritarians and the rebels, right? I mean, from as far back as I can remember, that was always those people always belonged to the left, and that's why I was on the left for so many years, and I'm sure why you were on the left. I mean, you're literally poking the biggest bear on earth, right? And you can't do that without being, a liberal, right? Because you're not of the establishment, right?
It is true that, I mean, the left seems to be a little bit more, you can't say this, you can't do that, this is the way to act. Whereas in the past, that's what the conservatives were for, much of North America, youth, that is.
That's right. And so I want to go back to this story with, the American election and intelligence concerns about um, Russia, China, and Iran sowing discord. Because look, no matter which way this ends up, and as you're watching this, I can guarantee you there are one of two things happening right now. The Democrats are challenging Trump's victory, or the Republicans are claiming that the Democrats stole the election. Right? There's either that's one of those two things is happening. But no matter what, there is conflict right now. There is a lot of tension, and so and so when you have foreign actors like Russia, China, Iran, pouring gasoline on this fire and locating people and groups who can agitate to make something happen, that's a very dangerous situation we find ourselves in. And so of the three, you said that Iran is the most aggressive. Can you expand on that a little bit? Like what makes Iran the most aggressive of the three who are interested in creating chaos?
In terms of targeted violence, targeting senior American bureaucrats and President Trump, I mean, being the US president is not a safe job, but never, I don't think, in history have we had so much visibility on a foreign nation trying to kill American leaders, right? And so it all relates to US foreign policy. I mean, Obama and that, you know, was downscaling sort of activities related to we need to take out Iran's nuclear capabilities and trying to hold out olive branches. And obviously, Trump took out a senior Iranian figure. And
Yeah.
so they are very willing to employ organized crime on American soil. What other entities we don't know to target former President Trump. And that this for an intelligence report to come out and say that, we already, we had, of course, there had to be, after the attempted assassination attempt, the FBI had to disclose, that it knew of a probably unrelated plot, but that Iran, their aggressiveness is directly connected to what's going on in the Middle East right now with Israel and regime protection. And I think it is because they know they're more vulnerable than we really recognize, the Iranian regime. So that's Iran. Russia, maybe not quite as willing to be out there with direct political assassinations, but wide scale destabilization operations. Uh, Both Iran and Russia would be, they're so invested in that what I got out of the intelligence report, they're almost not hiding it. And so the U.S. intelligence community can find instances of Iranian and Russian intelligence directly funding people that would be involved in what some people might still think are grassroots sort of social justice groups, or they may be, sort of pro-Palestinian, anti-Israeli groups in the United States. But these entities would be directly funding them. And as you say, if our predictions are right, there are major street protests going on in the United States right now, and there's foreign money behind them. It's not all foreign driven, but it's a mingle and a mess of what Iran and Russia want to see in the United States. And China still holding out that sliver of hope that it can trick foolish people into the world that it is a soft and not a malevolent global power. So it's going to be more sophisticated in the way that it interferes in the election. From what I gathered, we won't see China putting itself out there in any easily attributable sort of broad cyber or social media kind of attacks or cognitive warfare that Russia clearly can be behind. But they're going to be opportunistic. I believe they'll be directly supporting, people in congressional races. They're not openly out there favoring Kamala Harris. I'm pretty sure that under the radar, they're going to have a lot of influence towards the Democratic side. But the other thing that came out of that intelligence report is that China it's getting very sophisticated and very nimble in the way that a result happens. They're not necessarily leaning into which one they think will happen. They'll be very quickly in responding to what happens. And so if we can look ahead or forecast what's happening right now on American streets, you're going to see a bunch of news reports, pouring fuel on whatever narrative China thinks can benefit its the next few years.
And this is what makes it all so messy. And for to speak to what you said earlier about the younger generation, I think this is situations like these are what cause people to turn away from a system, right? Every revolution in history takes time to build, but it's usually the younger generation that sparks the revolution because they see the flaws in the system. Whether you're talking about the Russian Revolution or any Latin American revolutions that, sorry to tell you, Sam, often had CIA fingerprints on them.
Yeah.
But the concern here is that, for all intents and purposes, the American Republic, I think, is the most perfect democratic is the most perfect democratic system ever assembled, ever put in a paper. It's superior to the parliamentary system that we have here in Canada because it allows for just the utmost in the American system, the American people by definition, maybe not in application, should have the loudest voice. Yeah. of any population in the world under any system.
Yeah.
And what's scary is that the system has been so corrupted that young people are losing faith in it. They're losing faith in a democratic republic. And so what comes out of that? What comes after that? And really the only way to go, if you're talking in terms of flipping the board upside down and starting fresh, is to go into a totalitarian system, something that resembles communism or fascism, or, as I wrote, something that resembles this weird fusion of both, which seems to be what the direction we're headed.
And that's exactly what what I glean from intelligence is this is the sophistication is, of course, Iran, Russia, and Chinese intelligence realize that there is a real grassroots feeling and narrative in the United States that of the young generation starting to lose faith in democracy. So they are going to do whatever they can through cognitive warfare and media influence to shift, tweak, distort, and build, push that narrative along. And so to make it worse than it actually is, or to undertake actual operations, we can look at fentanyl and it's very easy to see how that is fentanyl death is tearing apart American society. And so just think about it, that provides a platform to insert information operations into. And I've seen it. I've literally seen Twitter accounts or X accounts where whether it's I call them the whatever you want to call them, the coalition of the evil. So Venezuela, China, Russia, Iran, they'll take those Vancouver downtown east side type pictures, but obviously in the smaller American city version, and say this is your society, right? So they're not only causing that, as I'm saying, and the U.S. Congress is now saying, but they're using that in disinformation. They're using some people when I write about how money laundering causes unaffordability in Canadian cities, especially, and it could get so bad that it gets that way in the States. Yeah, that would be an easy thing to exploit because, as you know, the young generations are now ready. One of the reasons for giving Trudeau the boot is he's done nothing on affordability, and
Yeah.
so to me it just shows how you can go from an organized crime operation creating a problem in society to actually state intelligence using that. And obviously it's a very complex and sophisticated thing, and I'm not always going to diagnose it correctly, but I do think those two factors are happening.
I think so too. And what's difficult to assess is what belongs to who, right? Like, it's funny because this is just a very small example, but every single time I release an episode of Me and You Together, I get an influx of emails and DMs on X. And I can always tell which ones are Chinese because they use words like disgraced. They use words that aren't commonly used, in conversation, right, amongst Westerners. So I can always tell who's what. But at a larger scale, how do we figure out what's coming from where and what the truth is? And that, I think, leads to a bigger conversation about censorship and who bears the responsibility of deciding what really is information and distributing it. Because we are in this weird space where, I'm not going to lie, I go on X and I see propaganda all day, every day, especially with this American election, right? There's so much actual misinformation floating around that if I wasn't well read and didn't have the opportunity to speak to people like Sam Cooper on a regular basis, I might believe some of it.
It's easy to believe, very easy to believe. I mean, even for trained people, it takes a lot of work.
Right. And so we have this overwhelming amount of information floating around all the time. Not only that, but we have people playing a political game that will willingly and openly manipulate what they know to be false in order to play to their benefit. So we don't really have many honest actors at work. And that's why it's so difficult to figure out like what is coming from where, what's true, what isn't. And you're kind of left to run like purely on instinct. And I think that's where we find ourselves now, right?
I think so. It's a scary place, and we've talked
Mm.
about it maybe once or twice, but it seems that education, of younger generations in critical thinking and dissecting social media, traditional media, all types of communication is essential. And yet, if you have kids, that that's going to be a very hard battle with,
Yeah.
TikTok addiction and etc. So,
Yeah.
I mean, the more we're talking today, the more I'm just seeing like the mountains in front of us. There's no easy path through them.
There isn't. And, like, that's the thing is, for people listening, I always say this at the end of every episode, but I'll say it here. Like, the Bureau is you're one of the only ones. And that's what's fascinating to me about this point in our history, is that there's like 5 people: Sam Cooper, Seymour Hersh, Matt Taibbi, Michael Schellenberger, maybe Tucker Carlson, but he's obviously biased. But people who are actually invested in finding the truth. Doesn't necessarily mean that you always hit the nail on the head. Sometimes you misfire, right? But people that I can trust are actually looking, right? Maybe I should take Tucker Carlson out of that
I
batch,
mean,
but
it's funny that I wouldn't see myself with any of them, but what I would agree at all, but what I would agree is each one, and I know most of the names you said, is a contrarian, and is if they're I have to believe that each of them is trying for their version of the truth. And honestly, I don't see myself close to any of them, but I do know that I write a lot, and I'm standing out alone on things for sure.
Sam, I think you're closer than you know. And I it's funny because I was reading Seymour Hersh earlier this week, and I was like, I thought of you. I was like, this is like you guys are part of a very exclusive club, one that I'm not even allowed to stand on the lawn of. So, but the point is like, we're just in this weird murky place where it's just like we're all trying to piece together what reality is. And I think we have our own biases, that things that we want to believe that are true, that kind of end up being part of that jigsaw puzzle, and
Yeah.
then poisoning everything else. So speaking of poison,
Like my wanting the CIA never to talk to a drug dealer in a foreign land.
that's right.
That's my fairy tale that I've
that's
given up on.
that's the piece of your jigsaw that's kind of. But speaking of poison and the CIA, let's talk about uh, this recent. Is it a congressional report on Chinese fentanyl? You literally just published this piece like right before we started. So can you talk about that, because that is, I mean, it's gigantic, and I think it's something that we need to touch on.
Yeah, we've talked before about how evidence comes out in congressional hearings about how they are now saying that the Chinese Communist Party incentivizes fentanyl trafficking worldwide. By the way, I before getting into today's story, I presented recently at an anti-money laundering conference for a regional, police gathering, and a gathering of great professionals, bankers, due diligence, corporate, in the Toronto area. And it was interesting to me that a subject matter expert, they weren't aware that I've reported that, the US Congress now says that the CCP is literally trafficking fentanyl and incentivizing methamphetamine. And this person, who I judged to be knowledgeable on internal Chinese networks, said, yeah, whether it's destabilization or not, the People's Liberation Army is directly involved in methamphetamine production. And so these are the little pieces of evidence that, they just come out and scream at you that it's not a normal, competitive rival, China and the United States. It's someone that is using drugs in a precursor, so to speak, to real war. And they're using, this is what the U.S. Congressional Committee report says, coming out about a week before this election that we're now talking about has happened already, and there's already protests in the streets. Uh, we're kind of jumping around in time on this episode, but uh, it it says that we being the American government, must be honest with the American people that our agencies know the Chinese Communist Party has members of international organized crime in high level party state positions. Chinese organized crime supports the Chinese Communist Party. It is working directly for the Chinese Communist Party with Mexican cartels to produce fentanyl precursors from the factories controlled by China, to move it through Canada and Mexico into the United States. And the goal is to destabilize, to attack American citizens and homes, to take lives. And their money laundering apparatus is so sophisticated with Chinese organized crime within the United States that it's taking the proceeds of this interactivity with Mexican cartels and using them in Chinese political influence operations, encapsulated with these networks I've been talking to you about called Beijing's United Front Work Department. So you just have this. What the report says is we need to start calling out, treat the citizens like adults. We need to tell them that United States law enforcement and intelligence understands China is using organized crime to attack through drug deaths. It's using the funds to corrupt our elites, including politicians, and it's involved in what is really a war without yet, cannons and tanks and missiles. So it's saying the prescription is that be honest with the citizens, call the Chinese Communist Party an international drug trafficking operation. That way, if they won't reduce their flooding of precursors into Mexico and Canada, which they won't, then you can then sanction senior Chinese Communist Party officials who are directly involved in Chinese organized crime and Chinese money laundering activities. So that's one. You may listen to that and think it'll never happen, and it may never. But what's new here is you have a substantial portion of the U.S. government saying uh, they seem to be leaning towards, like him or hate him, Donald Trump's administration did have a whole of government approach leaning into that the Chinese Communist Party is the enemy, and there's no turning back. You're on a collision course. Uh, it looks like real war. Hopefully, it doesn't have to be, but they are involved in a type of clandestine war. And the sooner the American government recognizes that and is real with its population, the better. That's what the report says in a nutshell.
Now, contrast that against the Canadian federal government's response to these allegations of these things happening in our own country.
Perfect example. I testified at the invitation of MP Kevin Vaughan in Ottawa to the National Press Gallery yesterday. I drew a line from United Front actors in British Columbia, who I know very well, who had a private meeting with Senator Yuen Pao Wu. And so this tape recording was provided to me by a diaspora source who bravely within these networks reached out to me, becoming, to me, I would say, an FBI CSIS level source, allowing me to access activities on Canadian soil of the Chinese Party state. And this senior senator, Yuen Pao Wu, in this meeting, and I played a tape recorder for essentially national TV for anyone that wants to go to the tape. His words are that he's very concerned that there is new scrutiny from Canadian government looking at least into the activities of the United Front. And he is repeatedly asked by these United Front agents what his stance on it is. So this shows how the United Front works on and gets politicians on side. And he says, Canadian senator fighting very hard to against a sort of, classification of association with United Front activity being wrong. So, as I say, not only was this Canadian senator pledging his support for Chinese Communist Party activities in Canada, he went on to have a role in our foreign interference inquiry, which only came about because of my reporting of such activities. And he was arguing against, any measures to counter these Chinese influence operations. In a nutshell, so what it shows you is there is a captured elite, including senior politicians in Canada, that argue there's nothing wrong with the United Front. They argue this is normal sort of diaspora community activity, when in fact, the real experts, the honorable people in Canada know this is the Chinese United Front is a criminal organization meant to undermine our society. And here on the other side, this U.S. congressional report, based on testimony from experts in the CIA, is saying the United Front should be classified a national security risk and fully banned. No entity should even be allowed to operate in the United States. So contrast Canadian senator who's very influential, appointed by Justin Trudeau, saying he's fighting to protect United Front activity. People shouldn't be, faced with questions about their activity. In the United States, we have portions of government saying ban it completely, which is the correct position.
I agree. I agree as well. Now, I guess here's the question. The question here is motive, right? Because it does certainly seem to me like the U.S., what people are now referring to as the blob, which is, kind of there's the neoconservative security state within the United States government, within the federal government apparatus. They seem to be angling for a direct conflict with China in some way. What's your view on that? Do you see that, or do you see it more as them becoming more protectionist and realizing that China has been attacking them from all angles for a long period of time now?
I get it. I mean, I've seen good classifications where they break down politicians into internationalist or semi or America only. Let's build walls and we don't engage. We let Taiwan be taken over. So it's difficult for me. Neoconservative blob is like a bit too big. I think it's more complex than that.
Yeah.
My own view is that there are people, bipartisan, that is Democrats and Republicans, that say it's integral for us to be there with Japan, probably with Australia, with Taiwan. If Taiwan is threatened, that's going to be and taken over. That's like a 20 to 30% chunk out of global trade, like that.
Right.
Once Beijing takes Taiwan, Japan is quite arguably next. Australia next, right? If we look 30, 50 years, I don't want that. So
right.
I do think, that's not to say, I definitely think, there are some pretty hardcore, military industrial, let's just call them extremists, that do always have these fevered war dreams of always being, ready to go somewhere. But
Yeah.
I balance it towards, look, China, Russia, Iran, they see themselves at kinetic war with us. They see America being below them. Yeah, so I do think recognize the world as it is, not how we see some of our people that we don't quite agree with within the United States. And we have to be ready because they're ready to come at us. And as this report says, they're already doing it with fentanyl.
And that's a big one, right? I mean, look, the fentanyl epidemic in North America is unlike anything we've ever seen. I mean, just speaking in terms of British Columbia, right? Like I'm in the Calgary area in Alberta, and I'm running into people that I know from back home, left, right, and center, right? And everybody's telling me, you have no idea how bad things are in Vancouver. Like, it's the worst thing they've ever seen. And it was the worst thing I'd ever seen before I left 2 years ago. And they're telling me that it's gotten, like, I mean, it is 100 times worse than it was.
That's I'm due to I'm due to travel back to have a little thing in that area. So I'm going to be interested to see, but I get that sense, you know, and what do you expect when you legalize fentanyl? I mean, it as the premier there, David Eby did, and as you know, you just I've told you before, any life you could save with safe supply is a positive, but in the balance, I mean, I don't think it's hard to deny that the more opioids through safe supply you pump into an economy, organized crime sucking it out, turning it into more fentanyl, and it almost never going to its intended use, that is people that, you know, can take a non-toxic opioid. This explains how something could snowball like that in Vancouver.
And when you're out there, just don't go with Adam Zivo, or you might end up with your face on a lamppost.
No, no.
Um, um,
I
it's
keep a
amazing, but
low
it,
profile always.
right, but you know, like it's this is the reality, right? Is that you have Chinese organized crime running fentanyl through our countries, murdering tens of thousands of people, you know, and you know, look, whether or not you believe that these people, you know, made a choice in their addictions, it doesn't matter, because this stuff is being intentionally imported into our countries with the purpose to maim and destroy. And it is unquestionably leading back, the threads lead all the way back to the Chinese Communist Party. And that's a problem. That's a real problem. And you know, you and I have talked about TikTok. Look, let's just look at our cultural revolution, right? The cultural revolution has Maoist markers all over it. Our Western cultural revolution. So, you know, I always question, you know, like I did earlier in this episode, is, you know, where is this stuff coming from? But it's no question to me that a lot of it's being ported in through China, just because it has the markers of what they experienced, you know, 80 years ago, right? And so that's, I mean, it's just unquestionable. So, you know, the question is now, I think, what do we do? How do we solve this problem? Because we can't lock ourselves off from the rest of the world, nor can we censor. Or, you know, that's the thing, right? We need free speech. Without free speech, you don't have a free society. But what do we do? How do we deflect these nefarious actors from, you know, having real influence within our nations? And look, Sam, before you go ahead, some would say that this is just karma. This is karma for what we've done around the world for decades. And I would definitely your CIA guys, Sam. I would definitely lend an ear to that argument, because we have been a part of, I mean, look, whether people want to admit it or not, the U.S. State Department was involved in the Maidan coup in 2014 in Ukraine. That's irrefutable. So some people would say we're just reaping what we sowed, but I just have to believe that there's a way for us. There's a way out of this now that we know what's going on, right?
Yeah, in terms of reaping what we sow, you know, as you know, I mean, in my book Willful Blindness, I cited a very, very located person in Vancouver that helped me get information on some very important people in the Chinese threat networks. And their quote was, "It's the opium war in reverse." And, you know, that's never to justify, of course not. Like, to me, you can't look at, we did this and so they're doing that. But I mean, we're raising a lot of confusing questions
I
about,
know. I know. We
between
need
us here
hours. We need hours on this. Yeah.
on where we philosophically go from here.
Yeah.
In If this is, back to the document, what the U.S. government, a portion of it says, we're in not only a Cold War, but a hybrid war with with Beijing, except they're the ones that see it like that and have an objective to win. And we still haven't accepted that we're in a hybrid war, right?
Yeah.
We're tens of thousands dying every year, right? Where do you go from that? And Beijing does think they're justified with, the opium trading and, the 100 years of humiliation.
Yeah.
So they're, to me, I can only see as far ahead as, protecting myself and my family, God and country, and trying to be good to the rest of the people of the world. But at the end of the day, we got to protect us.
Yeah.
And, I, getting into, reaping what you sow, I think you're pointing towards also, there's a lot of information coming at us, and where's it coming from? How do we sort it out? We were probably disseminating a lot of information and soft power before. And my tethered thought for today is it's confusing times. I
Yeah.
don't philosophically know where we go from here. And the theme here is that we're jumping around in time, knowing that the election in the US will have just happened. And if we're both correct, it's probably there's a lot of discord in the streets. A lot of it is domestic, but a ton of it is fomented by these powers that are involved in hybrid war with us. So where do we go as a society from there? Because is it going to get better next election cycle? I can't foresee that,
Yeah.
these elections that are like 49 to 51 changing anytime soon.
No, and that's the thing is and how much of that number is, critically thinking voters who are aware of the issues and are voting, or are informed before they vote as to who they're voting for and why, and how much of it is, just the result of foreign propaganda, ported in through social media and other means. And how do we know what to, it's just, dude, we have opened a can of worms that I think both of us, we have literally 5 minutes left, and
We're
there's
going to
just,
call this episode Can of Worms because
it's just, yeah.
there's been a lot of sorting around in the worms, and yeah, we'll have to come back to the can of worms and sort it out probably.
So, so one thing I want to touch on before we go, just really quickly, in the press conference yesterday, you mentioned Mary Ng and her potentially witting or unwitting involvement with Chinese interference. Can we talk about that really briefly before you go? Because I wanted to touch on it. You glanced over it in our last discussion, and I was gonna pull you back and rein you in, but we went on to something else before we could talk about it. So can you just explain to our listeners who she is and what her potential involvement is?
Yeah, so there's been a big movement in Canada stemming from my reports that revealed the Chinese election interference story. And it's been examined at this foreign interference inquiry. Is there substance to the intelligence allegations that at least 11 candidates for federal office in the Toronto area alone, so the main population and riding for polls in Canada, but one city. And so that huge number of 11 MPs has become the headline. And as I tell people, they assumed that was across the whole Canada. No, this was just Toronto alone in 2019. It gets worse in 2021. But there's been a big cry since other intelligence reports or reviews have come out and said, yes, serious things happened. And in this press conference, I said, here are some names that I have reported in my heavily lawyered and vetted, updated book, Willful Blindness, on election interference, and how all of this media reporting, mainly driven by myself, came out of the book Willful Blindness because government sources reached out and said, you're on it. Something even worse has happened, this election interference story. I explain how, my discussions with a source appeared to give them confidence that even from the outside, I was saying there's a tremendous United Front election interference going on among candidates. And so I reported those stories. And to weave back to where your question is going, I said, at the invitation of MP Kevin Vuan, who believes that he was targeted and attacked by Beijing because of his critical positions to China. On the other side, I said, yes, I believe people are getting targeted in that way. My three national security sources said Liberal cabinet minister, trade minister for Justin Trudeau, Mary Ng, is one of the 11 candidates in the Toronto area in 2019 allegedly implicated in clandestine Chinese consulate and United Front influence network support, with the key point that CSIS, Canadian intelligence, assessed that she was not wittingly implicated in this interference network. Some, as I've reported, before and elsewhere, CSIS classifies as wittingly implicated. So that would suggest much more directly involved in clandestine activities. Mary Ng, a very important Justin Trudeau appointee and cabinet minister, an important name to bring out to the Canadian people. Again, national security sources said a major primary concern of CSIS in their investigations was that a staff member allegedly of Mary Ng was meeting with a Chinese diplomat who was an undercover confirmed intelligence officer, and that there were discussions privately about China related issues, and that CSIS believed and knew that staff members of elected officials, such as this one, have direction to report back to Chinese intelligence in the consulate about the activities and the whereabouts of Canadian elected officials. And quoting a source, the source said, "We know that staff have direction to report back to the Chinese consulate on Mary Ng." So serious, obviously, because this is a cabinet minister. This is a member of the Ontario Liberal government staff that became, as soon as Justin Trudeau was elected, a very important part of his office. So that power center surrounding Trudeau, and as I've reported in Willful Blindness and previously, the concerns around Justin Trudeau center in his office. After working in Justin Trudeau's office, Mary Ng very quickly rises in his government by winning the nomination for a riding with a campaign directed by Liberal Party power broker Michael Chan, who goes on to be the subject of a very controversial surveillance warrant. So what I'm saying here, without getting it more complicated, is Mary Ng, named by CSIS sources as one of the 11, let's stress again, assessed to be not wittingly implicated in this network. And I just saw on X, as I've been trying to get comment from Mary Ng on the allegations, never have I had comment, but she just X'd or posted that she has categorically rejects any insinuations that she's involved in networks such as this, and she appears to blame MP Kevin Vuan for holding this press conference in which I made these comments. Now, mark this. Remember, my press conference played a tape recording of Senator Yuen Pao Wu privately talking to members of the United Front Work Department in Canada, who I'm asserting with proof are involved with different parties in influence and interference operations. So this is not just reporting anonymous intelligence sources. I drew a very clear line and played a tape recording demonstrating a Canadian senator saying that they pledged to fight hard to protect the activities of the United Front, who are at the center of these influence operations allegedly surrounding these 11 Toronto area candidates in 2019. So that's it in a nutshell.
And you should have already known that by playing that recording, you yourself, by presenting evidence of actual misconduct and corruption. You yourself, Sam Cooper, were engaging in anti-Asian racism. You should have known that before you did it.
I haven't watched for the comments on Twitter, but I'm glad you raised that, because the U.S. Congressional Committee report does raise the fact that the United Front Work Department employs the strategy of convincing its friends within foreign governments that pointing to United Front Work Department activity is anti-Asian racism. So there you go. The differences between portions of the US government that understand the existential threat and problem, and captured elites wherever they may be, whether it's in Toronto, Ontario, or Ottawa, or Vancouver.
Well, you're hearing it here direct from, according to the people in my DMs, disgraced journalist Sam Cooper. it's, it's just always so hilarious, man. Like I
I'm a
go through them.
journalist that can take a shot in the chin and has come back. I'll tell you
Oh,
that.
dude, you're the best. You're the best in the active in the world today, my brother. I am, like I said, man. I'm over the moon every time you and I get to talk. I can't believe I get to host you, and dude, it's just surreal. This world we're in, it's surreal.
Putting my finger on this can of worms, there's so much gaslighting going on. And when you mention, the DMs you're getting, and like, this person could not possibly be witting of, a Chinese gangster sending buses in with
Yeah,
international student. It's gaslighting. It's pure gaslighting. So
yeah,
that's my own reality, right? And so everyone is dealing with, gaslighting from all directions. This is the
but
confusion we're in.
that's it. It's like, sometimes, Sam, I watch you, man. I listen to you, and I can tell that you're hamstrung by your own integrity, because you don't want to say what you truly think or feel, right? And I respect that about you, man, because that's what separates the two of us. I operate purely on what I feel. You operate purely on evidence and what you can prove. But it's like as somebody who's been covering this for a really long time, I mean, it must just drive you crazy, to see it, to watch it unfold, to know what it is, and to know that, like, of course, your journalistic integrity holds you back from speculating on what something could be, but to know in your heart what it is, right?
Often, I mean, I appreciate you saying that, and it really does get to, like, sometimes you feel like, am I living in a world where all facts show this is true, and people are denying it, and it's just like living in a political wasteland, right? And
Yeah.
you have to kind of, yeah, you often have to just go back to the facts and state them.
Well, I mean, just the fact that you've maintained integrity through it all, I mean, it just kind of puts you a cut above everyone else, right? Because I mean, like, dude, like, every time I like the DMs, they just flow in, and it's like, I'm just like, yeah, like, it's just hilarious to me because, like I wrote in the piece, the recent piece that I published, like we're playing by a set of rules that have been long abandoned by the people who want to do harm to us or want to rule over us. Right. And so here we are, like, here's Sam Cooper, like, okay, I got to make sure that this is provable fact. I got to make, you know what I mean? Vetting every piece of information before you to give it to the public. Meanwhile, like you said, these people are just gaslighting everybody
Mm-hmm.
while you're trying to maintain your integrity. And it's like, I am very, very surprised you haven't taken the gloves off yet, because I think that day's coming, and when it comes, it's going to be a bad one.
I don't know. I really don't know. That's another worm in the can for today.
Well, there it is. So we'll put a pin in it for now. Sam, as always, hang around for 10 seconds once we're done recording. But for now, tell everybody where they can find you.
Yeah, you can go to the bureau.news first and foremost, and to get into the where the gaslighting and the cans of worms are, go over to Twitter and at Scooper Cooper.
Yeah. And everybody follow Sam. Um, this thing just keeps growing. It just keeps getting bigger. Honestly, man, I think you're at the center of the story of the century. I really do. Every week that goes by, I see something and I'm like, I just go to the bureau. I'm like, Sam, I know Sam's writing about this right now. I just keep refreshing.
And I know you're noticing that more and more I'm reporting on the same stories and networks in the United States, and
Yeah.
that makes me happy, because just more sources of information, more readers, more viewers. And at the end of the day, that's where this hybrid war will be won and lost. It won't be won and lost in Canada.
And correct me if I'm wrong here, and we'll close on this, but it seems like just through your work that American law enforcement and intelligence are more open to speaking with you than people in the Canadian sphere. Is that correct? Or do you have like an equal amount of sources on both sides?
Um, I would say, I wouldn't say, well, put it this way. Since my reports have come out on the Chinese election interference story, uh, I can't talk to people in intelligence because Justin Trudeau has called them criminals, right? So it's that information flow has been stopped. But I can, in an academic sense, I'm talking both to great Canadians and Americans in the field, and so I would say that the flow of information from the U.S. government just in congressional reports is amazing right now. And these are people I've been in contact with. While those reports are being written, they follow my work, and so I'm happy that my work has in some ways informed the top tiers of the U.S. government.
Yeah, and as I wrote on X, and we'll conclude with this, when Justin Trudeau called out the criminal leakers, I wrote, Sam Cooper is a criminal leaker. I'm just a getaway driver. And there it is.
There it is.
All right, my brother. Well, we'll be back in a couple of weeks again. But for now, man, thank you once again for everything you do, Sam. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you.